After World War II, my grandfather ended up working in an isolation hospital as a fire officer, and then after that he worked for an electrical company in Essex in Chapel Heath as a general stores manager, and that was a job he did until he retired. In the 1960s, in the early 1960s, just before I was born, my grandparents sold their house in Chapel Heath, Essex, and moved to a bungalow in Clacton on the Essex coast. I spent many summer holidays and Easter holidays and half-term holidays having wonderful, idyllic seaside holidays at my grandparents' home in Clacton with my parents, and they were some of the best times of my life. Even in retirement, my granddad still wanted to have a job, and he used to man the deck chairs on the beach down at Little Holland in Clacton, and he loved his cars. He had a beautiful Austin car when he was younger, and when I knew him in the 60s and the early 70s, he drove it was the cars they used to use in Z cars. Ford Anglia, that was it. It was a pastel blue Ford Anglia with cream sort of stripe down the side, and it was a beautiful car. My granddad loved cricket, he loved watching tennis, he was a West Ham supporter all of his life and used to go to a lot of home games and watch it on the TV. In the 1980s, he began to suffer with Meniere's disease. He would lose his balance and fall over, and as a result of that he had to sell his bungalow and come and live closer to my mother and me in Ilford in Essex. And he used to tell us lots of stories about his firefighting days. So my stepfather arranged for my grandfather to be picked up in a veteran fire engine and be driven to Silvertown Fire Station in 1986 so that he could be presented with an axe by fellow firefighters at the station in recognition for the work he did as a station officer at Silvertown during the Blitz in the 1940s. They put on a firefighting display for him. He was VIP guest, honorary guest of the day, and there's a picture there that appeared in the local newspaper with my grandmother holding the presentation axe, which my grandfather was given by the current serving station officers of the day. And when my grandfather's funeral cortege passed through Silvertown, it went past the fire station, and all the fire officers and the men gave a guard of honour. That was when my grandfather passed away, his funeral in 1991. He only got to meet one of his great-grandchildren. That was my daughter Charlotte, who was born in 1987, and he adored spending time with her towards the end of his life. But sadly, he never got to meet my son Joe. I was pregnant with Joe when my grandfather passed away just after Christmas in 1990. He was a very proud, stubborn man. He had a very high tolerance with things. He didn't show his emotions very much. He was able to control his emotions. He was a very practical man who liked doing DIY. He loved doing gardening, and towards the end of his life he got more and more frustrated, especially having Meniere's disease and going deaf and not being able to do all the things he enjoyed. He also suffered with arthritis and ongoing problems with his spine from that accident that he'd been invalided out of the fire brigade from, and it caused him a lot of frustration in his later years, and he hated being dependent on people. But my mother looked after him and my grandmother until the day he died. He went into a hospice. He got leukemia, and he just went downhill very fast. But I do remember seeing him in the hospital, having a lovely chat with him with my daughter, and we know that was the last conversation I had with my granddad in the hospital before he went to the hospice, and he died just before Christmas. But I will always remember him. He was an amazing man. He was a hero to me, and Winston Churchill called all of the London Fire Brigade men and women who served during the Blitz and during that terrible time and saved London from certain destruction by enemy bombers. He called them the heroes with grimy faces, and my granddad was one of those heroes. And just by his job, his 22-year career in the fire brigade, he made a difference to a lot of people's lives. He saved lives, but to me he was just my granddad, and he was someone I loved very much. He played a big part in my childhood, but I felt when I was writing the book that I got to know him in a lot more depth, and I got to know a lot more about him and his career by talking to fire brigade historians and finding out what he would have done during the Blitz and what that would have been like, being on duty while the bombs were falling, putting out fires, being on duty like 24/7, and it was nice to be able to piece together some of the stories about the fires he attended and his career record. There were many hundreds of thousands of men just like him all over the UK who didn't fight in battlefields in Europe or further afield. They fought the Second World War at home on the home front as part of the emergency services. And their stories are often overlooked in history, and I felt that I wanted a little part of my grandfather's story to be out there, and of course we have the amazing photographs as well to go with it. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing all about my grandfather's life story and the book I wrote.